The word soul does not appear anywhere in the official documentation. Not in the research protocols. Not in the funding applications. Not in the peer-reviewed papers that the Institute had published in journals prestigious enough that their names carried weight in rooms where weight mattered. Not in the orientation materials I was given on my first day, or the laboratory procedures manual, or the incident reporting forms, or any of the 47 documents I signed before I was cleared for access to the lower research floor. The word the documentation used was residual consciousness signature. RCS. A term precise enough to sound scientific and vague enough to mean almost anything, which I would come to understand was entirely intentional. You call a thing by its true name, and the true name carries implications. Implications attract attention. Attention attracts the kind of scrutiny that makes certain kinds of research impossible to continue. So they called it residual consciousness signature, and they built a laboratory around studying it, and they hired me to help. My name is Dr. Lena Marsh. Neuroscience. 8 years of postdoctoral research into the persistence of neural activity in the minutes following clinical death, a field so narrow that there are perhaps 30 researchers in the world working in it, and perhaps 10 who are willing to admit publicly that what they are finding does not correspond to what the existing frameworks say they should be finding. The Institute found me through my work. Specifically through a paper I had published 18 months earlier that had been received by the mainstream academic community with the particular cold silence that the mainstream reserves for papers that ask questions it would prefer remain unasked. The paper was titled Structured Information Persistence in Postmortem Neural Environments, Evidence Against Complete Dissolution. It argued, carefully and with extensive data, that something continued after the brain stopped. That the information encoded in a human life, the self, the memory, the specific irreducible pattern of what a person was, did not simply stop when the body stopped. That it went somewhere. The Institute's director, Dr. Chen, called me 6 weeks after the paper was published. He was precise and warm in equal measure, the combination of qualities that belongs to someone who is very good at getting people to say yes to things they might otherwise think more carefully about. He told me the Institute had been studying the same phenomenon for 11 years. He told me they had equipment I had never had access to. He told me they had findings that would, in his exact words, reframe everything I thought I understood about the boundary between life and whatever comes after it. He told me there was a position available if I wanted it. I wanted it. I should have asked more questions. I know that now. I know it in the particular way you know things after the fact, when the fact has made itself unavoidable, with the clarity of hindsight that is completely useless except as a lesson for the next time, if there is a next time and if you are in a position to apply it. I should have asked specifically about the lower research floor. About why a research facility studying postmortem neural signatures needed a lower floor at all. About what exactly was being studied on that floor that required a separate clearance level from the main laboratory. About why, when I toured the facility on my first day, the stairwell to the lower floor had a door that was not just locked but sealed, the specific, deliberate, architectural sealing of something that was meant to communicate not just access restriction but weight. Gravity. The understanding that what was on the other side of the door required more than a keycard to manage. I should have asked about Subject 11. I didn't know about Subject 11 on my first day. I learned about the others first, the way you learn things at the Institute, in careful sequence, each piece of information given only when the previous piece had been sufficiently integrated. Dr. Chen was methodical about this. He had a system, and the system had been refined across 11 years of bringing new researchers into work that broke frameworks for a living. The main laboratory was on the ground floor. It was bright and well-equipped and looked, to any outside observer, like exactly what it claimed to be, a serious neuroscience research facility with serious equipment and serious people doing serious work. The equipment for capturing and measuring RCS was sophisticated in ways that my own university lab had never been able to afford. The sensors could detect structured information patterns in the electromagnetic field surrounding a recently deceased subject, patterns that my paper had argued existed but that I had never had the tools to properly characterize. Here they could characterize them completely. And what the characterization showed was exactly what my paper had suggested and more than my paper had dared to claim. The residual consciousness signature was not a fading echo. It was not the last gasp of a system shutting down. It was organized. It was coherent. It carried, in its structure, the specific informational architecture of the individual it had departed from, the memories, the personality, the relational history, the complete interior record of a human life. It was, in any language except the language the documentation used, a soul. And it didn't disappear. That was the thing. That was the finding that the mainstream had received with cold silence and that the Institute had been sitting with for 11 years, turning over in their hands, examining from every angle, trying to understand. The RCS signature persisted. Beyond the window that existing framework said it should occupy. Beyond the minutes, the hours, in some documented cases beyond the days. It persisted in the space around the site of death with a coherence and a structure that did not degrade the way a fading echo degrades. It held. It maintained itself. It continued. As if it was waiting. For what, the research had not been able to definitively establish in 11 years. Until Subject 11. Subject 11 was not a person I met. Not a patient or a volunteer or anyone who had come to the Institute in life. Subject 11 was a signature. A captured RCS that had been brought into the lower laboratory 14 months before I arrived and had been the reason, though I did not know this yet, that Dr. Chen had called me when he did. I learned about Subject 11 on my 43rd day at the Institute, in a briefing that Dr. Chen conducted alone with me in a conference room with the door closed, in the tone of someone who has been working up to a conversation for 42 days and has finally decided that the person across from him is ready to have it. He told me the other 10 subjects first. What they were, how they had been captured, what the research had established about their signatures over time. He told me clearly and precisely, and I listened with the full attention of someone who has spent 8 years working toward exactly this information. Then he said, Subject 11 is different. Different how? I said. He looked at me with the warm and precise eyes of someone about to hand you something heavy and wanting to make sure your grip was solid before he let go. The others, he said, persist. They maintain their signatures. They continue in the space we have designated for them in the lower laboratory with a coherence that is remarkable and that we have documented thoroughly and that continues to challenge every framework we apply to it. And Subject 11? I said. Subject 11, he said, does not persist in the way the others persist. Subject 11 does something none of the others do. Something we did not anticipate. Something that has been the primary focus of this Institute's research for the past 14 months and that we have not been able to explain or predict or in any meaningful sense manage. What does it do? I said. He folded his hands on the conference table. It refuses, he said. Refuses what? I said. To be studied, he said. To be contained. To occupy the designated space in the way the others occupy it. He paused. Subject 11 refuses, in ways that our equipment captures and our frameworks cannot explain, to behave as if it does not know it is being observed. As if it does not know where it is. As if it does not have preferences about its situation. The conference room was very quiet. It's aware, I said. It is aware, he said. In a way that the other 10 signatures are not, or are not demonstrably. Subject 11 is aware of the laboratory. Aware of the researchers. Aware, we believe, of the fact that it has not gone where it was supposed to go. Where was it supposed to go? I said. He unfolded his hands. Picked up the folder in front of him. That, he said, is what Subject 11 appears to be asking as well. He slid the folder across the table. Welcome to the second phase of your work here, he said. Your access to the lower floor has been approved effective today. I opened the folder. On the first page was a chart. 14 months of RCS readings for Subject 11. Coherent, organized, persistent. And in the rightmost column, a notation that appeared every third or fourth entry, in red, that read simply, Subject aware. Interaction initiated. Interaction. Not response. Not anomalous output. Interaction. The word of something going both ways. I looked up from the folder. It's been trying to communicate, I said. For 14 months, Dr. Chen said. And we have not been able to communicate back in any form it has been able to receive. He paused. We are hoping that changes with you. Why me specifically? I said. He looked at me with those warm, precise eyes. Because Subject 11, he said, has been asking for you by name. The sealed door to the lower floor opened with 3 separate mechanisms. A keycard. A biometric palm scan. And a code that Dr. Chen changed every 72 hours and delivered personally to the 3 researchers cleared for lower floor access. The sequence of the 3 mechanisms mattered: keycard first, then palm scan, then code, always in that order, never varied. Dr. Chen had been precise about this during the access briefing and precise about why. The order is not about security, he said. The equipment on the lower floor is sensitive to electromagnetic interference in ways that the ground floor equipment is not. The sequence initializes the shielding correctly. Vary the sequence and the shielding doesn't engage properly. And without proper shielding, I said. He looked at me steadily. The signatures become aware of the transition before you complete it. They have time to prepare. Prepare for what? I said. For your arrival, he said. We prefer to control the conditions of observation as much as possible. Subjects that are aware of being approached before the observation begins behave differently than subjects encountered in their ambient state. You're talking about them as if they have agency, I said. We are talking about them, he said carefully, in the only language that has proven adequate to describe what they do. I went through the 3 mechanisms in sequence. The door opened. I went down. The stairwell was 12 steps. I counted because counting was something to do while the part of my mind that had spent 8 years approaching this moment from the outside was reorganizing itself around the reality of approaching it from the inside. 12 steps down and then a second door, lighter than the first, that swung inward on a pneumatic hinge that closed it silently behind me. The lower floor was not what I expected. I had expected something clinical. Something that looked like the laboratory upstairs but underground, the same white surfaces, the same organized equipment, the same bright even lighting of a space designed for rigorous observation. The lower floor was dim. Not dark, there was light, warm and low, emanating from indirect sources built into the junction of wall and ceiling all the way around the room. The kind of lighting that had clearly been chosen for a specific purpose. Dr. Chen had explained this during the briefing. Bright overhead light interfered with the RCS sensors in the lower floor in a way it did not affect the ground floor equipment. The lower floor sensors were 2 generations more sophisticated than the upstairs array and correspondingly more sensitive to interference. But the effect of the lighting was something beyond technical necessity. The effect was that the lower floor felt inhabited. Not like a laboratory. Like a room where something lived. The room was approximately 40 feet across. Around the perimeter, evenly spaced, were 11 containment fields, not physical structures, not cells or chambers in any architectural sense, but designated spaces defined by sensor arrays that both measured and, to some degree, maintained the integrity of the signature within them. Each one was marked with a number on a small panel beside the sensor array. 1 through 11. 10 of them glowed with a soft, even light from the sensors, the visual indicator, Dr. Chen had explained, of an active and stable signature. A contained, persisting RCS in its designated space. The sensor panel for number 11 glowed differently. Not the soft even light of the others. Something more variable. A rhythm in it. A quality that the other 10 panels did not have, as if the light itself was breathing. In and out. Slowly. With the specific irregularity of something that was not a machine producing a reading but a presence making itself known. Dr. Chen stood beside me. He watched me look at panel 11 with the expression of someone watching a reaction they have anticipated and are noting the details of. It started doing that 3 days ago, he said. The rhythmic output. Before that, the readings were more ambient, less directed. What changed 3 days ago? I said. We told it you were coming, he said. I looked at him. You told it? We have a limited communication capacity, he said. The interaction notations in the file, the ones in red. Over 14 months we have developed a rudimentary input method. Not language. More like signal. Structured electromagnetic input that the signature can detect and that carries basic meaning through its structure rather than its content. And you told it I was coming, I said. We told it, he said, that the researcher whose name it had been producing in its outputs was joining the team. 3 days ago. And the signature changed to what you see now. I looked at the breathing light of panel 11. It's been asking for me by name, I said. For how long? Since the 4th month of its residence here, he said. The first 10 months, the outputs were consistent with the other signatures, ambient, structured, persistent, but not directed. Then in month 4 the outputs began to include a repeating element. A pattern that our analysis team eventually cross-referenced against available linguistic databases. And it matched my name, I said. It matched your name, he said. Specifically. Consistently. In the outputs for the past 10 months, your name appears with a frequency and a placement that indicates it is not incidental. It is the primary directed output of the signature. Why? I said. I had nothing to do with this institute before Dr. Chen contacted me. I had never heard of Subject 11. I had no connection to this research beyond my published paper. Your paper, he said. Yes. He walked toward panel 11. Stopped 6 feet from it. Subject 11 signature elevated measurably on the day your paper was published. Our sensors captured the change and logged it. At the time we did not know what had caused it. When the name outputs began 2 months later, we cross-referenced against any event that might have produced the initial elevation. And the paper was the event, I said. You argued, he said, in published work that the thing these signatures are is real. That the persistence is genuine. That the self does not dissolve. He paused. Subject 11 responded to that argument. To being seen. In the way your paper saw it. Before anyone here had been able to see it in quite those terms. I walked toward panel 11. Stopped at 6 feet the way he had stopped. The breathing light was closer now and the rhythm of it was more present. More specific. Not the rhythm of a machine. The rhythm of something alive. What do we know about who it was? I said. Before. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. That is one of the complexities of Subject 11, he said. The other 10 signatures came to us through documented channels. Individuals who had enrolled in end-of-life research programs. Whose families had provided consent. Whose identities are part of the research record. And Subject 11. I said. Subject 11 came to us, he said carefully, under circumstances that are still being reviewed at an administrative level. The origin documentation is incomplete. How incomplete? I said. We know when the signature arrived, he said. We know it was captured by a field team during what was classified as a routine monitoring operation. We know the capture was logged. What we do not know, what the documentation does not contain, is who the signature was before it was a signature. I stared at the breathing panel. At the rhythm of it. You have a person in that containment field, I said, and you don't know who they are. We have a residual consciousness signature. You have a person, I said. If everything we are researching here is what we believe it is, if the persistence is real and the structure is the self and the information encoded in that signature is the actual irreducible record of a human life, then what is in that containment field is a person. And you don't know who they are and they have been here for 14 months. The room was very quiet. That, Dr. Chen said after a long moment, is the other reason we needed you specifically. Not just because Subject 11 asked for you. but because you are the only researcher on this team who has consistently insisted, in your published work, on that precise framing. On calling the thing what it is. And you thought that framing would help, I said. We thought, he said, that Subject 11 had been asking for someone who would use that framing. Who would walk into this room and say what you just said without hedging it into something more scientifically comfortable. I looked at the panel. At the breathing light. Has it been trying to leave? I said. In 14 months. Has it tried to go past the containment field? A pause that was one beat too long. Yes, he said. Consistently and repeatedly. The containment field has held. But the attempts have been escalating. In frequency and in what I can only describe as urgency. It wants to go, I said. It has always wanted to go, he said. From the first day. Whatever came before for the others, whatever process the departure of an RCS is normally part of, Subject 11 was interrupted in that process. The capture brought it here before the process completed. And it has been aware of that interruption every day since. I stood 6 feet from panel 11 and felt the rhythm of the breathing light on my face and thought about 14 months of interrupted departure. Of a self, complete and coherent and aware, held in a room it had never chosen while the process it was supposed to be part of waited somewhere on the other side of a boundary it couldn't cross. I'd like to try to communicate, I said. That's why you're here, Dr. Chen said. Not through the signal system, I said. Through something more direct. I want to talk to it. He was quiet for a moment. The signal system is the only input method we have developed that. It asked for me by name, I said. For 10 months. It responded to my paper. It knows language. It knows my work. The signal system is what you built to reach the others. I don't think Subject 11 needs the signal system. I took a step closer to panel 11. 5 feet now. The breathing light changed. Not dramatically. But it changed, the rhythm of it shifted, the quality of the glow altered in a way I felt more than saw, and in the sensor readout on the panel the output numbers moved in a pattern that I had not been trained to read yet but that had the unmistakable quality of response. Of recognition. Dr. Marsh, Dr. Chen said, behind me. A note of something in his voice that was not quite alarm but was adjacent to it. It knows I'm here, I said. Yes, he said. I took another step forward. 4 feet. The light breathed. And in the sensor readout, in the numbers scrolling on the panel beside the containment field, a pattern appeared that the analysis software flagged in real time with a notation I could read because it was the same notation that had appeared in red throughout the 14 months of documentation in the folder upstairs. Subject aware. Interaction initiated. Except this time there was a second line beneath it that I had not seen in any of the historical documentation. A line the software had generated automatically from its linguistic pattern analysis in real time. Subject producing structured linguistic output. I leaned forward and read the output. 2 words. Repeated 3 times in the data stream with the insistence of something that had been waiting a very long time to say them to the right person. You came. I stood 4 feet from the containment field of Subject 11 in the warm dim light of the lower floor and I read those 2 words and I felt the specific weight of them, the relief in them, the exhaustion in them, the 14 months of waiting compressed into 6 letters, and I said, aloud, to the breathing light. I came. The output numbers shifted. The rhythm of the light changed again. And somewhere in the sensor array something registered that had not registered in 14 months of monitoring. A reduction in the urgency output. A measurable, documented, sensor-captured reduction in the signal that the research team had been logging for over a year as the escalating desperation of something that needed to leave and could not. Not gone. Not resolved. But lessened. The way something lessens when it is finally, after a very long time, no longer entirely alone with itself. I opened my documentation journal. I pulled up a chair. And I sat down across from Subject 11 and I began. The communication was not what I expected. I had prepared for difficulty. For the painstaking work of building a shared language from nothing, the way you build a bridge from both sides simultaneously and hope the middle meets. I had prepared for ambiguity and misreading and the specific frustration of reaching toward something that is reaching back and the hands not quite connecting. What I had not prepared for was clarity. Subject 11 communicated with a directness and a coherence that the 14 months of documentation had not suggested was possible. Not because the documentation had been wrong, the signal outputs the research team had been capturing were accurately recorded. But because the signal system they had been using to receive those outputs was the wrong instrument for what Subject 11 was producing. It was like trying to hear music through a wall and concluding from the muffled vibrations that the music had no melody. The melody was there. The wall was the problem. I sat 4 feet from the containment field with my documentation journal open and I said, I'm going to ask you some questions. If the output system can carry the answers, I'll read them. If it can't, try something else. I'll pay attention. The breathing light shifted. The output numbers moved. The analysis software produced text from the pattern. I know how to reach you. I have known since your paper. The others could not hear. You will hear. I'm hearing, I said. Tell me who you are. A longer pause. The rhythm of the light changed in a way I was already learning to read. There was a quality to the changes that corresponded to the nature of what was being processed. Quick rhythmic shifts for simple outputs. Slower, deeper changes for things that required more. This was a slow, deep change. That is the question I have been trying to answer. Not to you. For myself. What I am now and what I was are not the same category of thing, and I do not have complete access to the before. You don't remember your life, I said. I remember the shape of it. The weight of it. The texture. I remember how certain things felt. I remember people in the way you remember music. You know the feeling of it without being able to reproduce the notes. I remember that I was loved. I remember that I loved. The specifics are partial. Is that because of the capture? I said. The way you came here, did that affect your memory? The light breathed slowly. The capture interrupted something. There was a process. I was in the middle of it. When I arrived here, the process stopped and I could feel the stopping the way you feel a word disappear from the front of your mind. The process would have clarified things. Resolved things. Instead, I have been here with the partial. What was the process? I said. What were you in the middle of? I don't have your words for it. In your language, the closest is going. I was in the middle of going somewhere. Not a place. A state. A completion. Your capture stopped the going and brought me here, and the going has been waiting ever since. I wrote that down. The going. A completion interrupted. Are you in pain? I said. The light changed in a way I had not seen before. Neither the quick shift of simple output nor the slow depth of complex processing. Something else. Something that in a human face I would have called the moment before an honest answer to a hard question. Not pain in your sense. Something that does not have a good translation. Incompleteness. The feeling of a sentence that has no end. Of a breath held for 14 months. I'm sorry, I said. The output numbers moved. You are the first person who has said that to me. I sat with that for a moment. The first person in 14 months of daily monitoring and documentation and research sessions. The first to say sorry. Not because the other researchers were cruel. I had watched Dr. Chen and the team work and they were not cruel people. But because the framework they were working in, the framework of residual consciousness signature and contained RCS and subject output, did not have a natural place for sorry. Did not make obvious the fact that sorry was called for. Tell me about the others, I said. The 10 signatures in the other containment fields. Can you perceive them? Yes. What are they like? I said. A long pause. Deep rhythm. They are quieter than me. Not less. Quieter. They are in a state I can feel but not fully reach. Like people sleeping very deeply. The going for them is also paused, but they are less aware of the pause. Less present to their own waiting. I do not know if this is better or worse for them. Why are you different? I said. Why are you more aware than the others? I think because of how I was stopped. The others, their process ended more gradually. Mine was sudden. The capture was sudden, and the suddenness preserved something that gradual ending would have released. I was caught mid-process, and the catching kept me awake. I thought about this. About the cruelty of it without the cruelty being intentional. A sudden capture that preserved awareness that a gentler transition would have let go. Subject 11 was more conscious of its situation than the others precisely because it had been most abruptly interrupted. Do you know why you were captured? I said. Do you have any memory of the circumstances? The breathing light went through a long, slow cycle. I know that it was not supposed to happen this way. I know that the people who captured me did not fully understand what they were capturing. I do not say this with anger. I have had 14 months to move past anger. I say it as information. The field team that captured me believed they were collecting ambient environmental signatures. Residual traces. They did not know they were capturing something still, mid-process. Still in the going. They didn't know, I said. No. And when they knew, when the readings showed awareness and the outputs began, I think some of them were afraid. And fear makes people hold tighter to things they perhaps should release. Dr. Chen, I said carefully. Do you know who made the decision to keep you here once the awareness was apparent? A pause. I know who comes into this room. I know their signatures the way you know faces. The one you call Dr. Chen has been here longest. He is not a bad person. He is a person who found something extraordinary and could not make himself let go of it. I understand this. I am also something that could not let go of the going, of the waiting, of the hope that someone would eventually come who would hear me clearly enough to help. Help you do what? I said. Specifically. What do you need? The output numbers ran for a long time. Longer than any previous response. The light breathed in a slow, deep rhythm that filled the room, and I sat in it and waited with the patience of someone who understands that the answer to this question is the answer to everything and cannot be rushed. Then the software produced the text. I need to finish the going. I need the process that was interrupted to be allowed to complete. I need someone to open what your facility's containment field has been holding closed for 14 months and let me do what I was already doing when I was stopped. Leave, I said. Not leave. Complete. There is a difference. Leaving implies going away from. What I need is to go toward. To arrive at the thing the process was taking me to. The containment field does not just hold me here, it blocks the direction. I can feel the direction. I have felt it every day for 14 months. It is not a place. It is a resolution. A rightness. The specific feeling of a thing arriving at where it was always going. I sat with that for a long time. If I help you, I said. If I find a way to release the containment, what happens? What does the process look like when it completes? I don't know exactly. I know what it felt like to be in it before the interruption. It felt like relief so large it had no edges. Like every question answering itself simultaneously. Like the held breath finally released. And then? I said. And then I am no longer here in a way that your instruments can measure. Whether I am somewhere else in a way that exists beyond your instruments, that I cannot tell you. The going was taking me somewhere. I believe the somewhere is real. I cannot prove it to you. I'm not asking for proof, I said. I know. That is why I asked for you. I closed my documentation journal. Not because I had stopped documenting, I would write everything later, in the residential room, from memory that felt etched rather than stored. But because the journal in my hands felt like a barrier suddenly. Something between me and what I was being asked to sit with fully. I need to understand something, I said. You have been asking for me specifically for 10 months. Before Dr. Chen contacted me. You read my paper and you responded and you began producing my name in the outputs. Why me? There are other researchers who have argued for the reality of what you are. Who have taken seriously what the mainstream dismisses. Why specifically me? The light breathed. Because of a single paragraph in your paper. Not the argument. Not the data. A paragraph in the introduction where you wrote about why you began this research. You described a specific moment. A person. Someone you lost. I went very still. You wrote that you began this work because someone you loved died, and in the moment after they died you felt something. Not grief, grief came later. In the moment itself you felt the thing I am trying to describe to you. The sense of something going. Of a process occurring that was larger than the stopping of a body. You felt it and it was the most real thing you had ever felt, and the existing frameworks had no place for it, and you spent 8 years building a framework that did. My hands were very still in my lap. My mother, I said. Yes. I felt her leave, I said. I was in the room. I felt something move through the room and I knew it was her and I knew it was going somewhere and I knew that somewhere was real, and I have spent 8 years trying to prove that what I felt was not. Not grief. Not wishful thinking. Not the mind protecting itself from loss by manufacturing meaning. Yes, I said. It was not any of those things. What you felt was the going. The process. Your mother was in the middle of it when you were in the room and you felt it because some people can feel it and you are one of those people, and you knew what it was even before you had the framework for it. I did not speak for a long time. Outside the lower floor, up 12 steps and through 2 doors, the institute continued its day. Equipment running. Researchers working. The ordinary machinery of a laboratory doing extraordinary things in the language of ordinary science. Down here the light breathed. And I sat with the thing I had been building toward for 8 years and felt it arrive not as a discovery but as a confirmation. The difference between being told something you didn't know and being told something you always knew but had not yet heard said clearly enough to stop doubting. I'm going to help you, I said. The output numbers moved. I know. I have known since your paper. I have been waiting for you to know it too. It won't be simple, I said. The containment system isn't mine to override. Dr. Chen will not agree easily. There are protocols and there are 14 months of research investment and there are 9 other signatures in this room whose situation I also have to think about. I know. I am not asking for simple. I am asking for right. I stood. Picked up my journal. Tell me everything, I said. Every day I come down here. Tell me everything you know about the process. About the going. About what the containment is blocking and how it blocks it and what releasing it would require. Give me everything I need to make the case. Yes. And in return, I said, I promise you I will hear all of it. Every word. Without filtering it into something more scientifically comfortable. That is all I have ever needed, it said. Someone to hear it as it is. I walked to the door. Turned back. The breathing light filled the dim room. 10 quiet fields and one that was alive in a way the others were not. One that had been awake and waiting and asking for the right person for 10 months. I'll be back tomorrow, I said. I will be here, it said. And there was something in the output, something the analysis software flagged with a notation it had never generated before in 14 months of monitoring, a notation someone on the team had evidently built into the system as a category without ever expecting to see it applied. The notation read, humor detected. I will be here. 14 months of going nowhere. Of course it will be here. I went up the 12 steps with the weight of everything it had told me and the specific feeling of a person who has found the thing they spent 8 years looking for and discovered that finding it is not the end of anything. It is the beginning of the harder part. I spent 3 weeks building it. Not rushing. Not the impatient urgency of someone who has made a decision and wants it implemented immediately. Deliberate, methodical, the way you build something you need to hold weight. Every session with Subject 11 documented completely. Every piece of information it gave me about the going, about the containment, about what the blocking felt like from inside it, recorded, analyzed, cross-referenced against the 14 months of prior data and against my own 8 years of published research. Subject 11 was precise. Whatever the process of departure had preserved in it, the sudden capture keeping it awake in a way gradual transition would not have. It included the capacity for exact, careful description of things that had no exact, careful language. It found its way around the language problem the way intelligent things find their way around obstacles. Not through the wall but over it. Not the word for the thing but the comparison that carried the feeling of the thing accurately enough to transmit it. It told me the containment field worked by disruption. Not by force, not the way a physical barrier works, not walls and locks. It worked by producing interference in the specific frequency range that the going operated on. Like static on a signal. The process of departure required a particular coherence of the signature, a building and aligning of the structured information patterns toward the direction of resolution, and the containment field's interference prevented that coherence from completing. Kept the signature perpetually one step short of the alignment it needed. Like jamming, I said, on the 5th session. Like jamming, it confirmed. I can feel the direction. I can begin the movement toward it. But the field disrupts the coherence before it can complete. Every attempt ends the same way. The alignment begins and then the static takes it apart. For 14 months, I said. Every day. Many times each day. I have not stopped trying. I thought about that at night in my residential room. The persistence of it. The daily repeated attempt and daily repeated failure of something that needed only to complete what it had already begun. The specific exhaustion of being one step from resolution for 420 days. I built the technical case first. The containment field frequency analysis. Subject 11's description of the interference mapped against the sensor data for the going attempts, the escalating urgency readings the team had been logging were not, as the prior interpretation had framed them, evidence of distress at confinement. They were evidence of repeated departure attempts. The signature was not becoming more agitated. It was becoming more practiced. Each attempt slightly more refined than the last. Slightly closer to the coherence threshold before the field disrupted it. It was learning how to leave. Slowly. Against the interference. Like building muscle against resistance. I laid this out in a 12-page technical document with supporting data from the sensor logs, cross-referenced with my own published framework, annotated with direct quotes from my sessions with Subject 11 wherever a direct quote carried more precision than my own description could achieve. Then I built the ethical case. This was shorter. 4 pages. It did not require the technical density of the first document because the ethical argument was not complicated. It was only difficult. If the residual consciousness signature was what 11 years of institute research indicated it was, a persistent, coherent, aware self, then the containment of Subject 11 without its consent, for the purposes of research it had not agreed to participate in, was not a scientific protocol. It was a detention. And the fact that the detained entity could not physically suffer in the ways a human body suffers did not resolve the detention into something acceptable. It made it stranger. Not better. I wrote it plainly. Without hedging. In the language of what it actually was rather than the language of what was scientifically comfortable. Subject 11 is a person. Subject 11 has been held without consent for 14 months. Subject 11 has been attempting to leave since the first day. The research value of its continued detention does not constitute ethical justification for that detention. We do not accept that argument for human subjects. We should not accept it here. I put both documents in a folder. I requested a meeting with Dr. Chen. He read both documents in front of me. He was a precise reader, no skimming, no jumping ahead, each page given its full attention before turning to the next. I watched his face while he read, and his face was the face of someone encountering an argument they had been, on some level, building toward themselves and were not entirely surprised to find arriving from outside. When he finished, he set the folder down. He looked at the window. Then he looked at me. "You've been talking to it every day for 3 weeks, he said. "Yes," I said. "And it has given you this." He touched the folder. "This technical account of the containment mechanism." "It has," I said. "Which you can verify against the sensor logs. Everything it described maps accurately to the data you already have." "I know," he said. "I checked while I was reading." "Then you know it's accurate," I said. "I know the technical account is accurate," he said. "The ethical argument is not a technical question." "No," I said. "It isn't." He stood. Walked to the window. Did the thing that people in positions of authority do when they are working through something they have been avoiding. He looked at the middle distance, at something beyond the glass that wasn't the view. 11 years, he said. "I know," I said. "The research has produced findings that have no equivalent in any other institution in the world," he said. "What we understand about the persistence of consciousness, about what the self actually is and what happens to it, we understand because of this work. Because of these subjects." "I know," I said. "Releasing subject 11, he said, ends that particular line of research. There is nothing else like it. The other 10 signatures are quieter, less communicative. Subject 11 is the only one capable of the kind of direct information exchange that has produced half of what we know." "I know that too," I said. "It's in the document." He turned from the window. "You're asking me to end the most productive research relationship this institute has ever had," he said, "on ethical grounds." "I'm asking you to release a person," I said, "who has been detained without consent for 14 months and has been asking to leave since the first day. The research relationship framing is the framing that makes it feel like a difficult institutional decision. The other framing is the accurate one." He sat back down. Looked at the folder. "If we release the containment," he said slowly, "we don't know exactly what happens. To the signature. To the other 10 fields. To the lower floor environment. Subject 11 has described what happens," I said. "It completes the going. The process resolves. The signature achieves the coherence the containment has been disrupting, and it arrives at whatever the going was always taking it toward. And we cannot measure that arrival," he said. "We cannot document it. We cannot verify it." "No," I said. "So from a research documentation standpoint," he said, "we release it and it disappears and we have no record of what happened beyond the point of release." "Correct," I said. 14 months of relationship with the most aware and communicative non-living consciousness ever documented, he said, and we release it into an undocumentable resolution. "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a long time. "It asked for me by name," I said. "For 10 months before I arrived. It responded to my paper, to a single paragraph about my mother, because that paragraph was the first time anyone in your research framework had used the right language for what these signatures are. It has been waiting for someone to use that language and act on it." He looked at me. "And you're going to act on it," he said. "Not a question. I'm asking you to act on it with me," I said. "Properly. With authorization. With documentation of the decision and the reasoning and the ethical framework. I'm not going to act unilaterally, that's not what this is. But I need you to understand that the argument in that folder is not going to get less true if we sit with it longer." He picked up the folder. Held it. "Give me 48 hours, he said. Subject 11 has given you 14 months, I said. 48 hours is reasonable. I stood. Walked to the door. Dr. Marsh, he said behind me. I turned. The paragraph, he said. About your mother. About feeling her leave. He paused. I lost my father 6 years ago. I was not in the room. I have spent 6 years wishing I had been. He looked at the folder. I built this institute partly because of that wish. I stood in the doorway. I know, I said. I think Subject 11 knows too. He looked up. It has never produced your name in the outputs, I said. In 14 months. But in our sessions it has referenced someone. Someone whose signature it felt briefly during its capture, in the moment before the process was interrupted. Someone who was nearby when it was stopped. He was very still. It described feeling that person's grief, I said. Briefly. In the last second of the going before the capture. And it said the grief felt like someone who needed to know that the going was real. That the somewhere was real. That the process completed even when interrupted. Even when held back. That it still knew the direction. His face did something I had not seen his face do. It wanted me to tell you, I said, that it still knows the direction. I walked out. I did not look back. Some things land better without a witness. I went down to the lower floor that evening. Alone. Sat 4 feet from the breathing light of Subject 11. I made the case, I said. I know, it said. I felt the conversation. He needs 48 hours, I said. That is fine, it said. I have learned to measure time differently than I once did. The light breathed. Slowly. Steadily. I sat with it in the dim warm room and I thought about my mother and the moment in the hospital room when I had felt her going and known the going was real and spent 8 years proving it. She made it, I said. Didn't she? The going completed. The light shifted. Deeply. Slowly. Yes, it said. They all do. Eventually. I sat in that for a long time. It was the most important thing anyone had ever told me. He called me into his office on the morning of the second day. Not the evening. Not after the full 48 hours had elapsed. The morning of the second day, which meant he had slept one night with the folder on his desk and whatever I had told him about his father and the grief that Subject 11 had felt in the last second of its capture, and one night had been enough. Either to decide or to understand that more time was not going to change the deciding. His office had the same window as the conference room. The same Pacific Northwest morning light doing its provisional thing through the glass. He was already seated when I arrived and the folder was open on the desk in front of him and he had written something across the top of the first page in red pen. 2 words. I read them upside down from the chair across the desk. Authorize release. I sat down. He looked at me. Before I explain the conditions, he said, I want to say something that is not in any official documentation and will not be. Go ahead, I said. I have known, he said, since approximately month 3 of Subject 11's residence here, that what we were doing was not right. Not wrong in a procedural sense, the protocols were followed, the documentation was maintained, the research was conducted within the framework we had established. But not right in the way that things are not right when the framework itself is the problem. Why didn't you act on it earlier? I said. He was quiet for a moment. Because the research was extraordinary, he said. Because what Subject 11 was producing, the outputs, the awareness, the communication attempts, was unlike anything we had ever captured, and I convinced myself that the extraordinary nature of the research justified the extraordinary nature of the situation. And now? I said. And now you sat across from me yesterday and said it told you my father's grief was real, he said. And the framework that I have been using to manage my conscience about this work did not survive that sentence. I waited. The conditions, he said. He turned to a second document in the folder, new, written since yesterday, dense with the specific technical language of someone translating a human decision into an institutional protocol. The release will be documented as a planned research conclusion. The containment field for Subject 11 will be deactivated in a controlled sequence rather than a sudden cutoff. The technical reasoning is that a sudden deactivation might interfere with the going in a way that a gradual reduction would not. Subject 11 described something similar, I said. The going needs to build coherence incrementally. A sudden removal of the interference might be as disruptive as the interference itself. Yes, he said. That matches our technical assessment. He turned a page. The release will be conducted with full sensor coverage. We will document everything the equipment can capture from the moment of deactivation through whatever follows. Not to study Subject 11 further, the release is unconditional. But because what the equipment captures during and after the process may inform how we manage the other 10 signatures. How we think about their situations. The other 10, I said. What happens to them after Subject 11 leaves? He paused. That is the question I spent most of last night with, he said. Subject 11 is the only signature that has demonstrated clear communicative awareness. The others are quieter, less present to their own situations, as Subject 11 described. But quieter is not the same as unaware. Quieter is not the same as consenting. No, I said. It isn't. I have been treating their quiescence as consent, he said. And I know, sitting here this morning, that it is not. Their quiescence is what Subject 11 called it. Sleep. Deep sleep. Not agreement. He closed the folder. The release of Subject 11 is the beginning of a larger review of this facility's entire relationship to what it has been studying and how. That review is going to be difficult, I said. It is going to be very difficult, he said. 11 years of research framework. Significant funding relationships. A board of directors that believes it is overseeing a neuroscience facility and does not fully understand what neuroscience facility is a euphemism for in this context. When do we tell them? I said. After the release, he said. I want to do this one right thing before the institutional machinery of doing the right thing in all the other ways begins. He stood. Tonight. The deactivation sequence takes approximately 2 hours to run properly. We begin at 11 p.m. and by 1 a.m. the field should be clear. I stood too. Dr. Chen, I said. He looked at me. Subject 11 described your father's grief, I said. But it also described something else. Something I didn't tell you yesterday because I wanted you to make this decision without everything at once. He was very still. It said the grief was not the only thing it felt in that last second, I said. It felt something else from your father. Something underneath the grief. A recognition. As if your father, in the going, felt you there even though you weren't in the room. As if the going carries the connections with it. The people. As if whatever you are to the people you love, you go toward them carrying that, and they feel you carry it even across the distance. He turned to the window. He knew I wasn't there, he said. Not a question. He knew you were everywhere you had always been for him, I said. That's what Subject 11 felt from him. Not your absence from the room. Your presence in who he was. The window did its provisional morning light thing. That is either the most comforting thing anyone has ever said to me, he said quietly, or the most unbearable. I think, I said, it might be both. He stood at the window for a long moment. Then he picked up the authorization document and walked to the door and said, 11 p.m. Lower floor. Bring your documentation journal. The day passed in the particular quality of hours that know something is coming at the end of them. I ate without tasting the food. I sat at my desk in my laboratory space on the ground floor and looked at 8 years of research notes and understood that everything in them had been pointing toward tonight and that tonight was going to make most of it feel like a sketch rather than a painting. At 9 p.m. I went down to the lower floor alone. Not to conduct a session. Just to sit with subject 11 in the hours before. The breathing light was different tonight. Not agitated, not the escalating urgency the sensors had been logging for months. Something else. Something that in a human being on the night before a long-awaited departure I would have recognized as a particular quality of stillness. The stillness of someone who has packed. Who has said the goodbyes they needed to say. Who is ready. Tonight, I said. I know, it said. I felt the decision when he made it. Are you afraid? I said. The light breathed. No. I was afraid for a long time. In the early months when I did not understand what had happened to me and did not know if anyone would ever hear. That was afraid. This is different. This is the opposite of afraid. What is the opposite of afraid? I said. Ready, it said. With gratitude underneath. The gratitude is mine, I said. It belongs to both of us, it said. You spent 8 years building a framework for what I am. I spent 14 months waiting for someone to use it. We have both been doing the same work from different sides. I sat with that. After you go, I said. Will you know? That you went? Will there be a you that knows it completed? A very long pause. The deepest rhythm I had seen from the light. I think yes. But not in a way your instruments can reach. The somewhere is real, and in the somewhere the knowing continues. This is what the going was always moving toward. Not an ending. A resolution. The difference matters. It matters enormously, I said. There is something I want to tell you before the deactivation, it said. Something I have been holding for the right moment. Tell me, I said. The paper you published. The paragraph about your mother. The feeling you had in the room when she went. You described it as the most real thing you had ever felt and said you spent 8 years wondering if it was real or if you had needed it to be real and your mind had manufactured it. Yes, I said. It was real, it said. She was in the going when you felt it. And in the going she felt you feeling her. And she knew you were there. And she knew you would spend years wondering, and she wanted you to stop wondering. I did not speak. She went somewhere, it said. And where she went she carried you. The way your father was carried. The way everyone carries the people who made them who they are. The lower floor was absolutely quiet. Stop wondering, it said. You were right. You have always been right. The 8 years were not wasted, they built the framework that got you here, to this room, to this conversation. But the wondering is done now. I sat in the dim warm light for a long time without writing anything or saying anything or doing anything except receiving what had been given and letting it land in me the way it needed to land. Complete. Without management. All the way. At 10:50 Dr. Chen came down the stairs with 2 other researchers and the technical team that would run the deactivation sequence. They set up the additional monitoring equipment quietly and efficiently. Nobody spoke much. The room had a quality that discouraged unnecessary words. At 11 p.m. Dr. Chen looked at me across the room. I looked at the breathing light of subject 11. We're ready, Dr. Chen said. The light shifted. One long slow breath. So am I, it said. Thank you, Lena. The first time it had used my first name. I opened my documentation journal. I nodded to Dr. Chen. And the deactivation sequence began. The deactivation sequence took 1 hour and 47 minutes. Not the 2 hours Dr. Chen had estimated. 1 hour and 47 minutes, which I know precisely because I documented every minute of it in real time, my pen moving across the journal pages with the particular speed of someone trying to keep pace with something that is moving faster than documentation allows. The sequence worked in stages. not a single cutoff, a gradual reduction of the containment field's interference frequency, step down in increments that the technical team controlled from a panel beside the sensor array. Each step reduced the interference by a calculated percentage. Each step was held for a defined period before the next reduction. The intention was to give the going time to begin building coherence at each new level of reduced interference before the next reduction occurred. The technical team called this the ladder. Step down. Hold. Step down. Hold. 13 rungs from full containment to release. I watched the sensor panel for subject 11 through the entire sequence. The first 3 steps produced readings consistent with what the prior monitoring data had shown during the going attempts, the signature beginning to build coherence, the patterns aligning toward the direction, the escalating organization of the structured information that subject 11 had described as the feeling of movement beginning. Except this time the interference did not reassert at full strength to disrupt it. At step 3 the field was reduced to 70%. The coherence that had been building held. Did not collapse. Did not get taken apart by the static the way 14 months of attempts had been taken apart. It held. The sensor readings for subject 11 at that moment produced a pattern the analysis software had never generated before. Not in 14 months of daily monitoring. Not in 11 years of institute research. The software flagged it with a notation that it created in real time, a new category, generated automatically because no existing category fit. The notation read, signature coherence sustained beyond disruption threshold. It was building. For the first time in 14 months it was building without being stopped. The breathing light on panel 11 changed. Not dramatically. Not with the sudden shift of something released all at once. Gradually, in the way that dawn is gradual, no single moment where the dark becomes the light, but a continuous becoming, a direction that is clear even when no individual instant seems to cross a threshold. The light was becoming steadier. The rhythm of it smoothing. The variability that had characterized it for 14 months, the irregularity that I had learned to read as the signature of awareness, of an awakened present self, was not disappearing. It was organizing. Aligning. The way scattered notes align into a chord. Step 4. 60% interference. The coherence built further. The software notation updated, coherence 34% OF estimated resolution threshold. Step 5. 50%. Coherence at 51%. Dr. Chen was standing at the monitoring station across the room. He was watching the readings with his hands clasped behind his back in the posture of someone who has made a decision and is now fully present to its consequences without retreating from them. I had not spoken to him since the sequence began. The room did not invite speech. The other 2 researchers were at their stations, documenting. The technical team were at the control panel, executing the sequence with the careful precision of people who understood they were operating equipment in conditions it had not been designed for, and that precision was the only thing between the sequence and something going wrong. Step 6. 40%. Coherence at 67%. The light on panel 11 was almost steady now. Almost without the irregularity that had defined it. And the room had changed in quality, the warm dim atmosphere of the lower floor had shifted into something I cannot describe with technical language and will not pretend to. Something that was not temperature and not sound and not light, but that was present in the way those things are present. The way a room changes when something important is happening in it, and the something important is large enough that the room itself seems to register it. The other 10 panels changed too. Not dramatically. Not the way subject 11's panel was changing. But the soft even light of each of the other 10 containment fields shifted slightly. Brightened almost imperceptibly. As if the going of subject 11 was producing something in the room that reached them in their deep sleep. As if even in their quiescence they could feel that one of them was completing what all of them were eventually going to complete. Step 7. 30%. Coherence at 79%. I was writing as fast as I could write, and I knew that what I was writing was inadequate, and I wrote it anyway because inadequate documentation is better than no documentation, and because the act of writing was the only way I had to stay present and functional in a room that was asking more of my framework than my framework had previously been asked to hold. The sensor output for Subject 11 at Step 7 produced something new. Not the structured linguistic output that had characterized our communications. Something beyond that. Something the software could not categorize linguistically because it was not language in the way our communications had been language. It was, I have gone back to this notation in my journal many times since that night, trying to find a better word, and I have not found one. It was music. Not literally. The output was electromagnetic data captured by scientific sensors in a research laboratory, and the word music is not a technical term. But the pattern had the internal relationships of music. The way the parts of it corresponded to each other and built and responded and resolved. The way it moved through the room not as information to be decoded but as something to be received. The way it did not need translation because it was not trying to communicate a concept. It was the experience itself. The going, made transmittable. The feeling of coherence building toward resolution, given a form that could exist in the room with us. I stopped writing. Not because I chose to. Because my pen stopped, and I let it stop because writing was the wrong response to what was happening, and my hand seemed to know that before my mind did. Step 8. 20%. Coherence at 88%. The light on panel 11 was steady. Completely, absolutely steady. Not the steadiness of a machine producing a constant output. The steadiness of something that has found its center and is no longer being pushed off it. Dr. Chen, across the room, was not looking at the monitors. He was looking at the containment field itself. At the space inside it where Subject 11 had been for 14 months. His face was doing something I did not look at directly because it was not mine to look at directly. Step 9. 10%. Coherence at 94%. The music, I am going to keep using the word, the inadequate word, because it is the closest word. The music in the room was doing something to the other 10 panels. Their lights were steady now too. All 10 of them. The quiescent, deep sleeping signatures in their containment fields, responding to what was moving through the room. Not waking. Not building toward their own resolution. But present to this one. Attending. The way people at a threshold attend to something they recognize even across the distance of deep sleep. Step 10. 5%. Coherence at 97%. The technical team lead said, quietly, without looking up from the control panel, 2 steps remaining. Holding at 5% for the defined period. The holding period was 3 minutes. 3 minutes at 5% interference. 3 minutes of a coherent sitting at 97% of the resolution threshold with almost nothing between it and completion. I thought about 14 months of attempting this exact approach and being stopped every time at much lower coherence levels. I thought about 420 days of a breath held. I thought about my mother in a hospital room and the feeling of something going and knowing the going was real and spending 8 years with the knowledge before I had the language for it. I thought about stop wondering. The 3 minutes passed. Step 11. 2%. Coherence at 99%. The room was, I have no word. Full. The room was full in a way that rooms are not full. Full the way a moment is full when everything that has been building toward it has arrived and there is no space in it for anything except itself. The 10 other panels were blazing. Not their normal soft even light. Something brighter, warmer, that the sensor readings logged as a simultaneous elevation across all 10 containment fields. Subject 11's going was reaching them. Whatever the music of the resolution was, it was audible to them in whatever way things were audible in the frequency they existed in. Step 12. 1%. Coherence at 99.7%. The technical team lead said, final step on your authorization. Dr. Chen. Dr. Chen looked at me across the room. I looked at the panel for subject 11. The output was not linguistic. Was not the music. Was something simpler than either and more than both. A single, clean, organized pulse. Repeated twice. Steady as a heartbeat. The way you say goodbye when you have already said everything. Dr. Chen said, final step. Execute. Step 13. 0. The containment field for subject 11 deactivated. The sensor panel went dark for exactly 4 seconds. Not a malfunction, the software logged it as a deliberate pause, a moment in which the sensors had nothing to report because what was occurring beyond their frequency range. Then the panel came back. And the reading it produced was something the analysis software processed for 11 seconds before generating a notation. 11 seconds of calculation. Of the most sophisticated RCS analysis system in the world determining what category applied to what it was seeing. The notation read, signature resolution complete. Coherence threshold achieved and transcended. Subject 11 no longer present in measurable field. No longer present in measurable field. Gone, in the language of instruments that could no longer reach it. Arrived, in the language that Subject 11 had been using for 14 months. The room was quiet. A different quiet from the quiet that had preceded the sequence. This was not the held quality of something that was coming. This was the quiet after. The exhale. The specific silence of a space where something important has happened and the importance is still present even though the thing that produced it has moved on. The 10 other panels had returned to their normal soft light. But not quite the same as before. Something in their readings had shifted. The analysis software, running continuously across all fields, generated a notation for all 10 simultaneously that it had never generated before. Ambient coherence elevated. All signatures showing increased resolution alignment. Subject 11's going had done something to them. Had shown them the direction the way a door briefly opened shows light to people waiting in a dark room. The light was gone now. The door was closed. But they had seen it. Their signatures showed they had seen it. Dr. Chen walked across the room to where I was sitting. He sat down in the chair beside me. We sat together in the quiet of the lower floor for a long time without speaking. The technical team began their post-sequence documentation quietly on the other side of the room. The 2 researchers made notes. The equipment logged its readings. It completed, I said finally. It completed, he said. The direction was real, I said. The somewhere was real. The sensors can't reach it, but the coherence threshold was real and it crossed it, and whatever is on the other side of that threshold is where it was always going, he said. Yes, I said. He was quiet for a moment. My father, he said. He's going completed, I said. The same way. The same direction. The same somewhere. He nodded once. Slowly. Then he stood up and straightened his jacket and became the director of the institute again with the specific effort of someone putting a coat back on after a moment of being without it. Tomorrow, he said, we begin the review. The other 10. The ethical framework. The board. He paused. It is going to be as difficult as we said. Yes, I said. But first, he said. And he looked at the dark panel where Subject 11 had been. At the space where 14 months of a breath held had finally been released. First we sit here for a minute and we let this be what it is. He sat back down. We Saturday. The lower floor quiet around us. 10 soft lights breathing. The space where the 11th had been, empty now in a different way than it had ever been empty before. Not waiting. Complete. Not the institutional review, that took considerably longer, involved people at levels above Dr. Chen whose names I was not cleared to know, and produced documentation I was not cleared to read. That process is still ongoing in ways I am aware of only at the edges, in the specific quality of certain conversations that stop when I enter a room and certain decisions that are made above my pay grade and filter down as policy changes that rearrange the research framework without explaining why. The review I mean is the one Dr. Chen and I conducted ourselves. Starting the morning after the release of Subject 11, before the institutional machinery had been engaged, before the board had been informed, before anyone outside the lower floor knew that something had changed. We started with the 10. Not with the goal of immediate release for all of them. Dr. Chen had been precise about this from the beginning and I agreed with his reasoning. The release of Subject 11 had been possible because Subject 11 was communicative. It could tell us what it needed and why and what the process required. The other 10 were quieter. Subject 11 had called it deep sleep. And you do not release someone from care because you have decided the care was wrong without first understanding what the release will do to someone who is asleep. So we started with listening. Or trying to. The signal system that the Institute had developed over 11 years had been built around the outputs of all 11 signatures. But it had been calibrated, in practice, by the outputs of Subject 11, the loudest, most directed, most communicative signal in the room. With Subject 11 gone, the calibration needed rebuilding. The signal system needed to be made more sensitive. Made to hear quieter things. I spent the first 2 weeks rebuilding the input methodology from the ground up. Using what Subject 11 had taught me about the gap between what the signal system was receiving and what the signatures were actually producing. Building toward the wall and over it rather than through it. Not the word for the thing but the comparison that carried the feeling of the thing accurately enough to transmit it. By week 3 I was getting responses. Not like Subject 11. Nothing like Subject 11 in directness or complexity or the specific quality of an awake and articulate self describing its situation with precision. What I was getting was impressions. Textures. The shape and weight of things rather than the things themselves. Like the memories Subject 11 had described of its own life, but not the notes but the feeling of the music. The signatures were not asleep in the way unconscious humans are asleep. They were present to something. Experiencing something I did not have adequate language for and that they could not give me language for directly. But they could give me the texture of it. And the texture was not distress. Not the held breath urgency of Subject 11's 14 months. Something closer to what Subject 11 had described when it talked about the other signatures. A deep, quiet waiting. Not impatient. Not suffering. But not resolved. Not complete. Oriented toward something, the way a compass needle orients, without moving toward it. I documented everything. By month 2 I had enough documentation to bring to Dr. Chen and say, they are not in pain in any way I can detect but they are not where they should be. They are in a waiting state that their own nature suggests should be temporary and has instead become indefinite. The ethical argument is the same as it was for Subject 11. Less urgent in its expression but not less true in its substance. He read the documentation. He did not take 48 hours this time. I know, he said. I've known since the night we released Subject 11. I've been waiting for the documentation to be solid enough to take upstairs. Is it solid enough? I said. It has been solid enough since week 3, he said. I've been waiting for you to tell me it was ready. It's ready, I said. He picked up his phone and called the board. The conversation that followed at the institutional level is not mine to describe in detail because most of it occurred in rooms I was not in. What I can tell you is its shape. The initial resistance of people who had invested significant resources in a research program and were being told that the research program's ethical foundation needed reconstruction. The gradual, reluctant acknowledgement that the technical and ethical arguments were not going away regardless of the inconvenience of their implications. The slow movement toward a new framework, one that did not abandon the research, because the research was too important to abandon, but that rebuilt it around a different relationship with its subjects. Not containment. Attendance. The word Subject 11 had used for what the entities in the forest had done for its long history of watching humanity. Not study. Witness. The word that the work had always deserved and had not been given. The new framework was approved at month 4. It included a formal process for communicating with each of the 10 remaining signatures. For establishing, to the degree possible, their awareness of and consent to their situation. For developing a relationship with each of them as the kind of thing they actually were rather than the kind of thing it was scientifically convenient to classify them as. And it included a protocol for release. For each signature when the time came. When the signature was ready and the going could be supported rather than interrupted. The deactivation sequence we had used for Subject 11 formalized into a repeatable procedure. A ladder rather than a wall. The first of the 10 was released in month 6. I will not describe that release in the detail I described Subject 11's. Not because it was less significant. Because it was different. Quieter. The signature had been in deep sleep and the going for it was a deeper, slower, less communicative process than Subject 11's. But the sensors captured the coherence building. The threshold approaching. The notation at the end. Signature resolution complete. The second was released in month 8. By the end of the first year, 5 of the 10 had been released. The other 5 remain. Not because we are holding them. Because the process of establishing communication with them and understanding their situation has moved at its own pace and that pace is not ours to set. Dr. Chen and I visit the lower floor every day. We sit with the 5 remaining signatures and we listen with the rebuilt signal methodology and we document what we receive and we wait. Not the waiting of researchers waiting for data. The waiting of people sitting with someone who is going somewhere and has not yet begun the going. I think about Subject 11 every day. Not with grief exactly. Grief implies that something has been lost and I no longer believe that the going is loss in any final sense. I think about it the way you think about a conversation that changed you, with a specific kind of gratitude that is less about the feeling you had during the conversation and more about the person you were after it. The framework it gave you. The things it made possible that would not have been possible without it. It called me by my first name once. In the last minutes before the deactivation sequence began. Thank you, Lena. 2 words. The first time in 14 months of outputs that it had used my given name rather than the formal identifier it had been producing since month 4 of its residence. I have thought about the significance of that shift more times than I can count. I think what it meant was that by the end we were not researcher and subject. Not the institute and its most significant scientific resource. Not even, in any formal sense, 2 professionals engaged in a documented research relationship. We were 2 people who had helped each other understand something important. Who had been, for a period, the most important presence in each other's situation. Who had each given the other something that could not be found elsewhere. It gave me the end of wondering. The confirmation that the going was real and the somewhere was real and my mother had arrived there and was there still and had felt me in the room even as she went. I gave it the end of waiting. The person who used the right language and acted on it. The hearing it had needed for 10 months before I arrived and 14 months after. 2 people. Different in every possible way. Occupying completely different categories of existence. Finding each other anyway across those differences and doing the work that needed doing. That is what I think about when I go down to the lower floor now. When I sit with the 5 remaining signatures in the warm dim light and listen for the impressions and document the textures and wait with the waiting that belongs to someone sitting with something that is going somewhere. I think about the work being done on both sides simultaneously. Building toward the middle. Hoping it meets. It does. I know that now. I have been told. Dr. Chen changed the name of the lower floor 6 months after Subject 11's release. Not officially, it is still the lower floor in all the documentation, in all the protocols, in all the conversations with the board and the funding bodies and the external researchers who are slowly, carefully, being brought into the new framework. But on the door at the bottom of the 12 stairs he placed a small card. Not a sign. Just a card, the size of an index card, fixed with 2 pieces of tape at the corners. It says, "The attending room." I have never asked him about it. He has never explained it. Some things do not require explanation between people who were in the same room when Subject 11 completed the going and felt the room change around it. We attend. That is the work. We sit in the presence of things that are between states. Things that have been interrupted in a process that their nature requires them to complete. Things that are waiting in a waiting that was never supposed to be this long. We listen. We document. We build frameworks adequate to what we are documenting. We make the case, repeatedly, to institutions that resist the case, for treating these things as what they are. And when the time is right and the signature is ready and the sequence can be run, we stand in the dim, warm room and we hold the ladder and we let them climb. We let them go. And they go toward the somewhere that is real. I know it is real. I was told by someone who could feel the direction. Who had felt it every day for 420 days of holding a breath. Who felt it finally release. The lower floor is quiet this morning. 4 of the 5 remaining signatures are in their ambient state. Soft light. Steady breath. Deep waiting that is not suffering but is not yet complete. The 5th has been showing elevated coherence readings for 3 days. Not the escalating urgency of Subject 11's going attempts. Something smoother. More organized. The signature of something that has been asleep and is beginning, very gradually, to wake toward the direction. I have the deactivation sequence documentation on my desk. I am going to go downstairs. I am going to sit with it. I am going to listen to whatever it can give me in the language of textures and shapes and the feeling of things rather than the names of things. And when it is ready, when the coherence is building and the direction is clear and the going has enough space to become itself, I am going to call Dr. Chen. And we are going to hold the ladder. And we are going to let it go. Because that is what remains. After all the frameworks and the documentation and the ethical arguments and the institutional reviews and the 4 months of board meetings and the 11 years of research that was both extraordinary and wrong in the same breath. After Subject 11 and the paper and the paragraph about my mother and the 8 years of wondering and the moment in the hospital room when I felt the going and knew it was real. After all of it, what remains is simple. Someone has to sit in the room. Someone has to listen. Someone has to hold the ladder when the time comes. And someone has to be willing to build a framework large enough to hold what they hear without pressing it into something smaller and more comfortable and less true. I am that someone. I go downstairs every day. I attend. I listen. And every time the sensors show a coherence building toward threshold, every time the notation appears that the software was not built to generate and generates anyway because the data demands it, every time the light on a panel goes steady and the music fills the room and the sequence runs its 13 steps down to 0. I think of Subject 11. I think, they all do. Eventually. I think, stop wondering. And I watch the going, and I know it is real, and I write it down as carefully as language allows, and I let it be more than language allows, and I go back upstairs and I do it again the next day. This is the work. It is the most important work I have ever done. It is the only work, looking back across 8 years of approaching it from the outside, that I was ever actually doing. I just did not have the framework yet. I do now.